Unfiltered podcast powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm your host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by my colleague and co-host. But before we get into the big games, this is the perfect time to remind you, FanDuel.com/bettheboard. Plenty of generous and aggressive new user signups include enhanced odds on the biggest matchups of the weekend, $1,000 free bets amongst all sorts of other offers. FanDuel.com/bettheboard. Make sure you add another sportsbook to your growing list of outs. And Payne, college football continues to motor on down the tracks, and more than ever, we have a more tenuous hold atop the leaderboard, with Georgia kind of asserting themselves as the class of the country.
No surprise. None whatsoever. And we were waiting for this move. I had felt personally like Georgia was the best team, but I was going to stick to our numbers. And then once we started incorporating more data from this season and less from last year, Georgia made the leap. And that was prior to last week. Alabama obviously struggled a little bit there with Texas A&M. Now remember, we discussed that opening performance against Miami, and I think that's when social media, a lot of people in media, were just crowning Alabama national champions, and we kind of were like, let's hold off on that. Bryce Young was under pressure a ton. That continues to be the case. He's been just pressured at one of the higher rates an Alabama quarterback's ever been pressured at. And we're starting to see some holes in the defense a little bit, which first started in the Florida game. So they are imperfect. There's no doubt about that. And I think we've kind of been saying as long as Georgia can get a little bit healthier on offense, that they have every chance and opportunity to win the national championship finally for Kirby Smart.
I know Georgia fans have been waiting with bated breath to try and get over the hump. We know the recruiting has consistently been on the uptick. They just haven't been able to realize the ultimate prize in all of college football. We'll see if this can be the year. Of course, when it pertains to the Georgia Bulldogs, we take the wait-and-see, hour-by-hour approach to their starting quarterback, as Jayden Daniels was at least throwing early this week in practice. Rare Payne that we talk about, a marquee talent at the position on a pitch count getting stretched out. I wonder if he's throwing on flat ground, and then he'll eventually go to the mound and throw simulated games like Major League Baseball pitchers.
30 throws on Monday, and my information says not sore on Tuesday. So trending towards potentially being out there this weekend.
Not being sore is a good place to be. And Georgia, Kentucky, one of the big game breakdowns we will get to. A lot of information still to come, and we may as well jump right into the thick of things, Payne. We'll start with two of the big game breakdowns that we have, and then we'll hit on a couple of key factors for some of the other marquee games. Want to thank all of our loyal listeners, as always, for voting in our poll on social media. You guys help steer the ship, and we want to be able to provide you the kind of content that you feel is most valuable towards your college football handicapping every Saturday. But let's go to Austin, Texas, Payne, and we'll kick things off with Oklahoma State and Texas for our first big game breakdown. And you're looking at Oklahoma State, a 5.5 point underdog at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 60.5, 60. This number has kind of ping-ponged all over the place. Texas has won the last two in the series after dropping the previous four, including a 7-point win last Halloween weekend in Stillwater over what was then a 6th-ranked Oklahoma State Cowboys team who came into that contest undefeated, much like they do on Saturday. I've always struggled, and I think a lot of handicappers do, Payne, in trying to quantify how you attach a number to the gut-wrenching heartbreak that Texas experienced against Oklahoma last weekend in the Red River rivalry, mustering just 20 points over the game's final 46 minutes. Oklahoma finished that contest on a 48-20 run. And when you look at Oklahoma State, sure, they're undefeated. We've had some questions about their resume. Their scoring margin of just plus 34 is 47 points worse than any of the other 12 remaining unbeaten FBS teams. So what does that tell me? Their margin for error isn't quite nearly as pronounced. This will be only their second true road game in Austin. When you look at Oklahoma State, I think the biggest question I have for you, do they have enough on the offensive side to put stress on the Texas defense, which has been their biggest weakness to date?
So your point at the top, it's extremely difficult to quantify, but I think there could be a slight advantage for Oklahoma State coming off the bye versus Texas playing in its Super Bowl last week and getting gutted late. And I know Sark has said all the right things about one loss not turning to two and how they mentally need to be tough to get over that hump, and he's been preaching it. since the first practice of the week. We'll see if that comes to fruition. In terms of Oklahoma State's offense, it's been struggle city. And listening to Mike Gundy's presser on Tuesday, he talked about the time off being used to work on fundamentals and how Spencer Saunders basically spent the entire time working on his footwork and his throwing motion. This does feel like a spot where the Pokes could find some level of relative success offensively. It's been a miserable start, to your point, on this side of the ball. Oklahoma State 61st in EPA per play, 78th in Connolly's SP Plus offense. 35% of Oklahoma State's early down offensive snaps have graded successful. It's not a good recipe for offense when you stink on early downs. That's the lowest rate in the entire Power 5. And so that does have a really predictive element. But this feels like a matchup where they're at least fighting in their own weight class and maybe even going down a class. And I'll be honest, like I was dead wrong here. Now, it may take more time than I think. I am a huge Pete Kwiatkowski guy. But I am stunned with how poorly Texas has played defensively. They are outside the top 100 in EPA per play allowed. They have gotten bullied at the point of attack, especially on standard downs, 102nd in standard down line yards allowed. Opponents are successful on 52% of those standard down plays because they are getting bullied. If you look at Oklahoma State, I guess where they're best, and this is really a relative success thing, they've been at least a little bit better on standard downs. And Jaylen Warren, I think, has been a pleasant surprise. He's got the Pokes ground game going a little bit in the right direction, 3 straight games of 100 yards. Deeper passes is where Spencer Sanders has been at his best, 123 passer rating on throws of 10 or more yards downfield, and that's really where you want to attack Texas a little bit. He really struggles, though, on the short stuff. And it's partly reading defenses. It's partly not having an ability to get the ball out on time and in rhythm and then deliver it, I would say, accurately into some of the tighter windows. So Spencer Saunders, 35 passer rating on throws in the 0 to 9 yard window. That has to get cleaned up. Maybe that's what all the fundamental footwork was this bye week. A lot of his issues have also come under pressure. And it's odd because obviously he's really athletic. But it seems like when he is faced with pressure, that's kind of when the breakdown in footwork happens. But Texas doesn't really create a ton of pressure. They don't really get a ton of havoc from the front seven. Just very poor pressure rates. Only 12% havoc rate from the front seven. They're barely, the Longhorns, inside the top 100 in PFF's pass rush grade. You would think, Todd, that there is some level of tinkering and some offensive adjustments made during the bye. All signs point to getting a little bit healthier on this side of the ball as well. It's not a dynamic offense by any stretch, make no mistake about that. But Gundy was kind of clear that he wants to play a controlled game. He's not looking for a shootout this week. So you would think it's more of the ground game. It's more Jaylen. It's more Saunders on the ground. Maybe some intermediate throws. But it doesn't feel like this is going to be something where he's looking to get into a track meet.
I don't know if I want to give Gundy credit for recognizing the talent he doesn't have on the offensive side of the ball, or this being more an indictment that they couldn't pick up where they left off with some of the previous caliber skill position players that we've seen come through Stillwater. Even if it was as recent as last year with guys like Chuba Hubbard and Tylan Wallace, I mean, Jaylen Warren and Tay Martin may become those guys, and you kind of talked about how Warren has gotten on track. I mean, 95 carries for 460 plus and 4 touchdowns against the 3 best teams they played in Boise, Kansas State, Baylor. Let's see if they can get him going offensively, but there's no doubt it starts and stops with Spencer Sanders and some of his decision-making to try and stay in a game like this. Now, for as deficient as Oklahoma State has been on the offensive side of the ball, defensively, I mean, this is where their bread has been buttered so far. They're allowing, roughly a third of available offensive yards to their opposition. They're creating negative plays on 13% of defensive snaps. They're doing a good job limiting big plays, but this will clearly be a step up in class against the Texas offense that's prolific in trying to get you out of your comfort zone. Talked at great lengths about Steve Sarkisian as a play caller, and there may not be a guy more dynamic in space, either running or catching the football, than Bijan Robinson, something you highlighted going into the Oklahoma game, and he did not disappoint.
This is appointment television for me, this side of the ball. It's the only matchup of the week that has a top 10 offense going against a top 10 defense. And you mentioned Sark and Bijan. I think going against Oklahoma State's defense that's getting lots and lots of love and praise, that's obviously what this is going to come down to. And we kind of saw this shift from Oklahoma State a few years ago before anyone, where I just started seeing the offense downtrending and the defense starting to project a little bit better based upon a scheme shift and some of the recruiting they were doing and some of the transfers they were getting. And I say that to say this. I don't actually think Oklahoma State's a top 10 defense. And I know Connolly has them 8th in SP+, and no doubt the Pokes D-line has been really dominant, right? They're talented, they're deep, 4th in line yards, they've stuffed 24% of runs at or behind the line of scrimmage. They've done a really good job limiting explosive runs, 3rd best in the Power 5 there. When OK State does get you in known passing situations, they've also feasted in that scenario, right? Sacked quarterbacks on 14% of passing downs, but they've played absolutely nobody. Like, not a soul. Not a single offense inside the top 50 in efficiency. The average rank of the 4 FBS opponents is 59th, and then you get Missouri State with an offense outside the top 25 in efficiency at the FCS level. And I like to look at all metrics. It paints a better picture than just kind of picking and choosing what supports your narrative or your thoughts. And for as well as the Pokes defensive line has played, PFF does have them graded the 3rd best front 7. They're 57th in EPA per rush allowed. Oklahoma State's also given up some explosives over the top through the air, and that's a concern in this matchup. The best 2 players from Oklahoma State's defense last year, they're gone. Rodarius Williams was their top cover corner. He was drafted. Trey Sterling, the best safety, is out for the year. Now, it helps, obviously, Texas is without Jordan Whittington outside, so you kind of, that's a blow for the Longhorns offense, obviously. But I just don't think the defense is nearly as good as some of the metrics indicate. I don't think it's good as a lot of people in the public believe. And when it comes to Bijan Robinson, I think stopping him is kind of a relative thing. His bad games are everyone else's career games. And last week we kind of saw that again. It's like Oklahoma's front 7, right? They're great getting havoc. They're great stopping the run. He's just a different kind of player. And I think with Sark's game planning and his play calling, you're not going to be able to completely shut Bijan down. And once that ground game gets going, then Sark hits you with the misdirection chunk throws. And that's really when Casey Thompson has been elite. And I kind of didn't come around on him quick enough, and maybe there's some areas of his game that are still lacking. But when he throws with play action and rollouts off that misdirection, he's been lights out. 131 passer rating off play action. He's been great layering in the intermediate throws. 149 passer rating in that 10 to 19 yard window. And, again, I try to listen to what coaches and players say and do, and you can really glean so much doing that. And I just go back to that Gundy quote, and he just said flat out, like, I'd prefer not to get in a shootout with them. We need to minimize the big plays. It tells me he's not as confident in his defense as the rest of the world. And maybe I'm too close to the situation. We bet under 51.5 week 2 against Tulsa, and the second half became a sweat. And that's a Tulsa offense 94th in EPA per play. They churned out a 53% success rate in the 3rd quarter against Oklahoma State, a 50% success rate in the 4th quarter. Most of that success came through the air where the Pokes have, I believe, questions. Tulsa threw up a 0.7 EPA per pass in the 3rd quarter and a 0.95 EPA per pass in the 4th quarter. I don't see Oklahoma State's defense playing to their current form metrically unless Texas is just hungover off the loss. Now, Todd, I will say this. Just looking at our core numbers and kind of removing my gut feel to this, the total's a little high. I wouldn't be stunned to see this come down. We made this in like the 55.5 range. That's just me kind of blindfold look at the core number. Don't really go with what your gut feels Oklahoma State's defense actually is. So that's kind of the battle for me and why I haven't dabbled in the under here.
You mentioned the Whittington injury, and of course, Xavier Worthy goes out there and puts forth an effort for the ages. Second best receiving game in Texas history with 9 catches, 261 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Only Jordan Shipley had a better game in Longhorns history, most ever by a Texas freshman, best game in FBS by a receiver this season. But I did find it interesting talking about Sark and kind of having that chameleon-like approach to offense. Said that Texas could make some personnel changes to reduce the pressure on their secondary wide receivers in Washington and Dixon by playing more 2 tight end formations using 2 running backs, since both options would put better players on the field than the 2 still relatively unproven wide receivers being put on an island. So I'm very interested to see if there's a more concerted effort, for a lack of a better term, to go to play packages of 12 and 20 personnel groupings compared to what we've seen Texas utilize earlier. So a number of things to look for in this particular game. As far as the side, Payne, haven't seen much movement in the market. Pretty fair reflection of where these two teams are, given the myriad of concerns we still have about Oklahoma State, especially on the defensive side.
Well, that's the ultimate debate, is again, just kind of being a little bit more of an open book this season, and I can do that on a game that I don't really have interest in playing. But we made Texas, it would be a buy if you could lay 4 with Texas. And saying that, I probably wouldn't lay 4 with Texas just based upon the spot and the situation, but we're not as high on Oklahoma State, again, as the rest of the world. And if we don't think their defense is metrically in line, then the offense certainly isn't what's going to carry us over the top to back Oklahoma State here. And so I think the number's pretty fair. It just comes down to if Sark can get the guys regrouped quick enough and say, hey, we got the season ahead of us, right? Like this is a big game within our conference. All our goals are still ahead of us in the conference. And so if they can regroup, I think Texas probably is a little short at this price, but it's 18, 19-year-old kids kind of guessing situationally if they're going to be up for this game.
Yeah, one last thing on this one, too. You talked about Gundy saying he doesn't want to get into a track meet. It's an interesting approach if you want to go up against the defense that was on the field for more than 35-plus minutes, had their guts ripped out, and you're talking about 90-plus degree heat that this Texas stop unit had to contend with in Dallas last weekend. So plenty of food for thought. Should be an interesting game.
I don't think that's Gundy's thoughts ever. I mean, he's a little bit of a different bird. He's gonna do what he wants to do.
There is no doubt about that, and one of the more polarizing figures around Oklahoma State athletics for a variety of reasons. For the Big 12 to the SEC, where the aforementioned Georgia Bulldogs will put their undefeated 6-0 record on the line against another SEC East team that comes in unblemished in the Kentucky Wildcats. We're looking at Georgia as a 22.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total in this game sits at 44.5. The last 2 meetings between these two programs, Kentucky has scored a grand total of 3 points. The irony in all of that, Payne, Kentucky covered both of those football games as large underdogs last year, catching 17, and the year before catching 24 in an absolute monsoon. Kentucky, 1 win in Athens since 1977. Georgia's won 7 of the last 8 meetings by double digits. More impressively, though, for Georgia defensively, I mean, this is a group that's really stymied Kentucky, holding the Wildcats to 310 yards or fewer in each of the last 6 meetings, including 2 games where they held the Wildcats to less than 200 yards. When you look at Kentucky, this is only their second true road game of the season. They scored a robust 16 points in a hard-fought victory in Columbia against South Carolina. And I'll go out on a limb, Payne, and say that Liam Cohn's offense has underwhelmed at least. Don't tell Kentucky fans that as they come in undefeated, but he's really going to need to put together his Mona Lisa if Will Levis and company are going to have success against the nation's best defense.
No doubt about it. And in terms of the ground attack, this feels like the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. Kentucky wants to pound the ball down your throat, and Georgia's front seven's a brick wall.
Good luck, Kentucky.
It's, something's got to give here, and I think we kind of know what's going to end up giving. Give Kentucky credit, right? The offensive line's been outstanding. 2nd in line yards, number 1 in opportunity rate, and despite being really predictable, opponents have only stuffed 9% of Kentucky's runs at or behind the line of scrimmage. And if you only factor in running plays designed for running backs, strip all of their run plays out, Kentucky has a 55% rushing success rate on the year. That's the best in the Power 5. Chris Rodriguez, we talked about, I believe, last week or the week prior. Maybe it was the week prior against Florida. He's been an absolute animal. 58% rushing success rate himself, over 6.3 a carry, 33% broken tackle rate. Smoke has been a solid number 2. But are you really going to run on Georgia? I mean, maybe a couple snaps here or there, but it's not an efficient way to beat Georgia. Non-garbage time runs against the Dogs defense. Just 27% success. Georgia's D-line, number 1 in opportunity rate. So, when you try to kind of think about the game script and game flow here, Kentucky's not going to completely change who they are, right? They're not going to change what's gotten them to 6-0. They're going to try to run early, and I think they'll probably run as long as the game is in a fairly neutral state. But Will Levis is going to have to be a contributor here, because you can't beat a defense like Georgia's being one-dimensional. And you're not going to be able to out-muscle or out-physical the bigger, stronger team in a phone booth. It's just not going to happen. And, you look at Will Levis, I would say he has been solid is probably the right word choice there. Far better passer under center than what Kentucky's had in recent years.
How dare you talk poorly about Terry Wilson?
Who's the other guy who the Raiders drafted in the 3rd round and then immediately traded to the Dolphins? And I think
Brian Edwards?
The Dolphins practice squad. No, the receiver converted to quarterback that just ran a bunch.
I thought it was Edwards, but no, you're right. Lynn Bowden, that's the guy.
Lynn Bowden. Yes, yeah, there we go. Yes. So he's certainly a better thrower than him. And I guess if I'm being generous, he's like Will Levis is an average SEC quarterback when you factor in his legs. If we only graded his throwing ability, likely below average. And that's kind of what the accuracy numbers indicate. A lot of Levis's throws come off play action, nearly 40%. And there's nothing wrong with helping your quarterback out, especially when your ground game is so strong and you want to make every play look the same. And that's when Levis has been its best, right? 120 passer rating with play action, 83 passer rating without. But if you get in a situation where Kentucky's down 17-20 late 3rd quarter and you're trying to hold on for a cover, I'm not sure drop back passer Will Levis is going to get you to the window. I just don't see that being the case. Last week against LSU, where Kentucky's dominating on the ground, LSU is loading guys in the box to stop Rodriguez and Smoke. Kentucky's passing game generated negative 0.2 EPA per pass attempt on non-play action throws. And that's against an LSU pass defense barely inside the top 100 in EPA per pass allowed. And because teams obviously in college play really unbalanced schedules, sometimes you actually have to resort to the smaller sample size and not include every game. You look and weight matchups in similar classes much heavier. Nobody's in Georgia's class defensively, but if you look at the 2 best passing defenses Will Levis has played against this season in South Carolina and Florida, he's generated a negative 2.5 predictive points when passing in those games combined. And now you get Georgia's defense, which shockingly, we had question marks just in terms of its youth at the corners. Number 1 in EPA per pass allowed. This just, anytime we break down a Georgia game, you're going to probably hear this from me at one point or another. I'm not sure how they're going to score. And the same thing really applies here. This has all the makings of Georgia-Arkansas Part 2. Now, if somehow Kentucky's able to manufacture 3 to 4 yards a run, they might be able to stay within this number. But if you turn this game on and Kentucky's getting stuffed early, Will Levis isn't covering this game for you as a pocket passer.
How dare you talk so poorly about Will Levis? He of the 189 total passing yards against Florida and South Carolina in those games, and leading Kentucky's offense to a net disadvantage of 158 yards despite a 2013 victory against the Gators. I can't see a scenario, Payne, where Will Levis doesn't keep them in the game with his arm. All kidding aside, if you take away Wan'Dale Robinson in the passing game, I'm not sure Kentucky has any other weapons that really, truly scare you. Problem being for Kentucky, for some of the reason they've been able to have success against Georgia the last couple of years, their defense has been extremely stout and stingy. I watch this defense now in 2021, and Kentucky fans won't want to hear it, but I don't really care. I get this feeling that this defense is a step, maybe 2 steps below what we've seen in the past, and Georgia gets out of the gates quickly, and we're not sure who the starting quarterback will be. Optimism again, like we talked about at the top of the show, that JT Daniels could be the guy, but even if he's not, the rushing success rate they were able to generate against an Auburn defensive front should be something they can replicate against a Kentucky team that, quite frankly, hasn't been challenged physically like they will be on Saturday in Athens.
I think that's the interesting component, because if you look at some of the rush metrics, specifically like EPA, it doesn't look like Georgia can run the football. But they have just been telling people, hey, we're going to hand it off here because we don't think you can score on us, and we're going to play a low variance game. And they're still able to manufacture enough yards in the ground. And again, it doesn't look like overly explosive. It doesn't look great with the EPA, but the offense is really moving the ball. And then going back to what we discussed at the top of the show, because some people do kind of peel through that and just go to some of the big game breakdowns. Let's see if JT Daniels plays this week, right? He practiced early in the week. That's something he has not done the last few weeks. They're saying he's on a pitch count. Threw about 30 passes Monday. Reports are no soreness on Tuesday. That is potentially a good sign for Daniels being up this week. But Kirby has been really, really smart, and Stetson Bennett is more than capable. You're at home. You're a 3-touchdown favorite. The goal is national championship, and I think Kirby's playing the long game here and being strategic with JT Daniels. That probably would be a situation where if he's not 100%, JT Daniels won't play. If he's 80%, like, hey, throw Stetson Bennett in there again. He's been more than capable. To your point, I think we both believe Kentucky's defense might not be as good as some of the numbers indicate. There were questions along the D-line coming into the season, especially at tackle. They lost experience at the linebacker level, and then 2 guys in the secondary, and Joseph and Eccles, were both NFL draft picks. Mark Stoops does a good job. It's been all about the system, and that defense typically is better than the sum of its parts. But Kentucky just feels like a defense that might be top 35. Right, not elite, but solid. The front 7 does feel like the strength metrically when you look at it. Top 50 in both line yards and stuff rate. Kentucky's held opposing ground games to a 35% rushing success rate. They're 19th in EPA per rush allowed, so they've limited some of the explosive runs and the down-to-down stuff. But where they've struggled is replacing the NFL draft picks in the secondary. And whether it's Stetson Bennett or it's JT Daniels, Georgia's advantage is actually through the air. Kentucky, 115th in passing success rate allowed. Mark Stoops has kind of built this zone defense, and he wants to keep things in front, but there's a lot of large throwing windows. And they've also given up some explosives despite kind of playing back, which he likes to do. Kentucky 70th in EPA per pass allowed. So they've given up explosives. They've given up the down-to-down stuff. Whoever's under center, Stetson Bennett or JT Daniels, doesn't matter. Georgia's been able to move the ball through the air. They're 11th or better in both EPA per pass and passing success rate. Maybe this is the game, Todd, where early on we see Monken throw a little bit more than usual to set up and create space for the run game, the inverse of what Georgia typically does. And if that's the case, then you're going to have Kentucky's defense playing on its heels, a defense that you and I both agree is probably a notch or 2 below last season.
Yeah, keep in mind as well for Kentucky, when you look at their schedule of opponents who they faced, LSU probably has the best vertical passing attack, and now I know LSU was able to accumulate stats when this game was largely out of reach, but UL Monroe, Missouri, Chattanooga, South Carolina, Florida, and LSU, not even close, in my opinion, to what you're going to get from Stetson Bennett if Georgia does elect to try and stretch the field a little bit. Going back to your other points, talking about this Georgia defense, just to contextualize with some of the more traditional stats as well. Georgia's allowed just 33 points through 6 games. It's the fewest they've allowed as a program to start a season since 1935. Since 2000, only Wisconsin back in 2019 allowed fewer points through 6 games than what we've seen from Georgia. Georgia's defense allowed just their 2nd touchdown of the season last week against Auburn, broke a streak of 171 minutes without surrendering one. Payne, there are teams right now in World Cup qualifying who can't keep clean sheets longer than Georgia's gone without giving up touchdowns during that particular span. So clearly this is a team built obviously with a truly elite defense, and we'll see exactly where the market goes on this game, because I'm not saying it's an apples to apples comparison, but at least on the surface it feels an awful lot like the Georgia game where they were laying 18.5 against Arkansas. We know that game ultimately closed at 16.5, but Georgia went out there and absolutely whitewashed the Razorbacks with a ton of public support on a very trendy underdog.
Yes, and the 1 point to the defensive side of the ball for Kentucky. LSU was without a couple weapons on offense. Butte wasn't himself. He was trying to gut through an injury. We see he's out this week. And then you got bad Emory Jones. There's been like varying levels of Emory Jones that are like super peak or bottom of the barrel. There's really been nothing in between. And Kentucky got bottom of the barrel Emory Jones in that contest as well. So even some of the better offenses they've played, there's kind of been an asterisk based upon what version of that team they got as well. Now, let me ask you this, because you brought up soccer, of course. I know you like to bring up hockey. You like to bring up soccer in these football podcasts. What happened to Team USA the other day? Did I see they didn't win?
We got CONCACAF, like always, go down to Central America, put forth a dud of an effort. They complain about the humidity, this, that, and the other. It was a questionable lineup, to say the least, from manager Greg Berhalter, but never a good sign, Payne, when you go on the road and you can't muster a single shot on target against the Panamanians. I figured you, of all people, might have some context down in Panama. You could have made a call or two, let us know about field conditions, and figure out what we were going to get. But thankfully, as we record here on Wednesday, we are heavy favorites against the Costa Rican side in Columbus on Wednesday night. So if we're able to pick up 3 points, end up with 6 points coming out of these three matches, I think it'll put us in a pretty good spot as far as qualifying for the World Cup. Although, one never knows. Team USA loves to make things difficult. And if we have to go through a fall next year of the World Cup without Team USA and Qatar, it won't be quite that nearly as much fun.
Yeah, I thought 2022 was supposed to be like a big year, and then 2026 you might actually compete. That was kind of the
exactly.
rumors, but
that's what you want to see.
Is that the style in which we are playing doesn't necessarily mesh with the talent once again.
Hey, that's the pretty much the hallmark for Team USA. When you have your best players playing all over the world in very different systems, it's tough to bring them together under the same umbrella. Unlike a Germany side or a Brazilian side where they know what the national flavor is going to be and exactly what they have to buy in to be contributing members. But you're right, 2022 should be a stepping stone for the 2026 World Cup that'll take place on domestic soil, and this so-called golden generation of American superstars hopefully can deliver some surprising results. But there you go. There's your soccer.
I'm still able
interlude.
to deal with you by 2026. We might actually have to attend a couple of these games.
Trust me, I'm all about trying to get out on the road. I don't think going to Qatar during football season will be in the cards next fall, but in 2026, hopefully that's the case for us to take in some of these things. It's one of the things on my bucket list I've never been able to do, go to a World Cup game live. Didn't have the chance back in 1994, even though they did play a couple games at Soldier Field. And I don't even know if you were born then, so you probably couldn't have gone.
All right, we've gone off the rails. Let's get into Arizona State, Utah.
There's your soccer interlude. All right, we'll go into a trio of games, not nearly as in-depth as what we've covered through the first two marquee matchups of the weekend. But this, Payne, at least for me, arguably one of the biggest of the weekend, because I am the consummate Pac-12 apologist here. And it's the Arizona State Sun Devils going out on the road to take on the Utah Utes. Utah moved their Pac-12 record to 2-0 with a resounding victory against USC last weekend. Arizona State, another workmanlike performance on Friday night against the Stanford Cardinal, and these two teams, at least on paper, projecting to be frontrunners for the Pac-12 South. When you look at Arizona State, they've won all their games this season by 13-plus points, 3-game win streak since losing to BYU. For the sixth straight game, they were able to accumulate more than 400-plus yards on offense. Meanwhile, Utah on the other side, an increased level of optimism. Cam Rising, the first Utah quarterback in 3 years to throw for 300 yards, 3 touchdowns, no picks in the game against USC, and he's actually only the third Utes quarterback to throw for 300 yards since they joined the Pac-12 way back in the early 2000s. When you look at Utah, it's impossible to handicap this game without ignoring some of the intangibles. This is a program that chartered a flight to Texas to attend the funeral of their fallen comrade Aaron Lowe on Monday, and you read Kyle Whittingham's quotes. A ton of credit to the players, the upperclassmen, the leadership of the football team doing a great job leading and making sure that they set the bar and expectations. We've had a lot of communication on the team. The players have had a lot of input with how we've handled the last couple weeks weeks. Credit to them. I think they handled it as good as possibly. End quote. You talk about a tragic situation no 18 to 22-year-olds should ever have to deal with. As far as on the football field, when you look at this particular game, Payne, we know that Utah has always been stout in the trenches, particularly on the defensive line, but this group hasn't exactly been vintage Utes football up front. It's adopted a much more bend but don't break mentality. Why is that important? I'm not convinced that Arizona State can string together drives, and when you look at how the Sun Devils have had success, it's been Jayden Daniels' legs or Rachaad White, more so than a vertical passing game.
Yeah, I mean, first you mentioned Utah's offensive outburst against USC last week, and that is great to see from that side of the ball. But this is really defensively along the line how Utah's won games in the past couple years, right? Like, they lean on their defense. They've typically had a great D line, and I think if Utah's going to win Saturday night, it will be about their defensive line shutting down Jayden Daniels and Arizona State's run game. If Utah can do that, then it allows their offense to have a fighting chance to hang enough points. I like what I saw out of the bye, but when I look at this matchup kind of on an Excel sheet, and I know you watch Pac-12 football more than I do just based upon...
You're damn right I do. You're damn right I do, Panama Red.
I try to get to bed a little bit earlier. You have an ASU offensive line that has been really good. They returned 4 starters. They brought in a P5 ACC transfer to round out that group. They've been dominant. Sun Devils' own line 5th in line yards right now. They're 2nd in opportunity rate, which effectively means the percentage of plays the offensive line does its job, creating room for the ball carrier to gain at least 4 yards. Now, it helps having a mobile quarterback, as you alluded to. You create that extra man advantage in the box. That's always made offensive lines appear better on the surface than what they truly are. But even if you look at PFF's run block grades, ASU's 13th in the country as a team. And you put it all together, Arizona State right now, 6th best in the entire country in EPA per rush. This isn't completely surprising. ASU's offensive line, I think, was projected to be one of the Pac-12's best coming into the year. Dug into that a little bit and, was looking at some draft prospect stuff. It looks like Kellen Deesh, and then Donovan West, both guys are going to be high draft picks. And so there's talent along the line. There's been some production there. You have the mobile quarterback. Utah's defensive line, I don't know what we're going to get out of them. They returned the top 8 guys this season. They were really young and inexperienced and light last season. They were supposed to take this massive leap in 2021. The front seven's done a decent job stuffing runs and making some negative plays. 8th best in the country there. Over 25% of runs against Utah have gone for a loss or no yards. But at times they've been bullied, and they've kind of gotten out of their areas. And you look at standard downs, right? Downs with, a run or pass element based on down and distance. Utah's defense is 65th in line yards on standard downs. The inverse of Arizona State's offensive line. Utah's 87th in the country in opportunity rate allowed. So they're allowing opposing teams to pick up those 4 yards and then some. And that's going to have to change Saturday night, right? The talent there along the Utes defensive line is there, right? They have some nice pieces. That's where they recruit best. But this can't be a game where Utah plays to their current defensive EPA rush rank of 45th. Utah has to play at peak. They have to get to that level and match the talent. If they don't, I think Arizona State's offense is going to be able to control the game flow and actually go on some long sustained drives. And that will be the entire key to this game. I truly believe that, because if Arizona State's offense gets rolling, I don't think Utah's got the offense to kind of match scores. The market is certainly giving Utah more than a puncher's chance here. I know our core number, nothing else factored in. If these teams played on a neutral, it'd be Arizona State minus like 3.2. Utah is obviously on the higher end of the home field spectrum for us. I know they made some renovations. I believe we talked about that in the Pac-12 preview. They've made some off-season renovations to Rice-Eccles Stadium. It makes it even louder. And I think they've only lost like 2 games at home in recent times. And to this point, there is some pro money on the Utes. Not a huge move by any stretch, but we've seen Utah go from a small dog. Now they've shifted to like the tiniest of favorites when you factor in some juice. But this certainly, like, there's no gifts being given here, Todd, in terms of like the actual line and the value of that number. It's just kind of one of those situational spot plays. You have a ruckus crowd, huge home field advantage. And I think if Utah's defensive line can stop the ground game to an extent of Arizona State, they'll have a chance to be in this game.
You know what's interesting, too, and I think you hit on the biggest points in all of it, talking about how Utah's got to find a way to be more disruptive, and I was kind of blown away. I did watch the first half of the Utah-USC game. I have to give Utah credit for getting momentum scores in the finals, and the game kind of got away from both sides late in that contest. But when you look at Utah's defensive metrics, 83% Payne of USC's drives in that football game, they were able to gain 2+ first downs. So it tells me that Utah can't necessarily get off the field on 3 and outs, and you saw even some of that in the game they lost 33-31 against San Diego State when they had a couple of key chances there. But on the flip side of that, USC had to work for everything, and you saw USC, when the game was still very much hanging in the balance, get bogged down in terms of throwing into tighter windows and such, with only 8% of the Trojans' drives grading out as explosive. So if they can force Arizona State to drive the field, series after series, I think that'll bode well. But you definitely have to keep the big play out of that Arizona State arsenal, and that's the way they feasted on UCLA's defense a couple weeks ago before they were able to dominate Stanford from start to finish.
I didn't watch much of that UCLA game. I flipped it on late, and they were up by double digits, and they were just kind of grinding it out at that point. What were they doing specifically on offense to generate that many points against a UCLA defense that we had a little bit higher hopes for coming into the season?
Gashing them on the ground. I mean, they did what they wanted to when they wanted to. And a credit to Arizona State, because, lesser teams and a team that we've questioned their mental toughness in the past, there is a special teams gaffe at the end of the half against UCLA that should never happen. Arizona State should have gotten away from the punt, let it roll through the end zone, and gone into the break with a small lead. It turns into a UCLA field goal, but then Arizona State's able to clamp down defensively in that second half, pitching a shutout. One last thing on this game, and I know you and I, typically on the same wavelength as it pertains to Herm Edwards being a little bit overrated as a head coach. When you look at the coaching side of things, do we give the definite edge to Kyle Whittingham in this spot, especially playing at home?
I don't know. I mean,
I know some of the bloom is off the rose there for him.
I'm not a huge Herm Edwards guy, but he's at least put together a quality staff and a lot of good analysts, and they run what they run. Utah is just kind of meh. Like, I mean, I think he's a great coach, right? He's a great motivator. He recruits well for who they are, and he gets the most out of his talent. I think he does very good with the development side of his players, and he builds those guys that fit his scheme. But I don't know if he's doing anything like revolutionary with game plans and down decisions offensively or defensively.
Yep, I can't argue that. I mean, I know he was one of the hotter names before and was a little bit surprised a couple of years ago that he was talked about potentially taking the USC job. Not quite sure that fits what the Trojans want to accomplish, but we'll see if Utah can get a win in what will go down as probably one of the bigger Pac-12 South decision makers as far as that conference race is concerned. To a non-conference game in Waco, Texas we go. A holy war of sorts, not of the BYU-Utah variety, but of the Baylor-BYU sentiment instead. You're looking at Baylor right now, a 6.5-point favorite at FanDuel Sportsbook. Total on this game sits at 50.5. This game has been on the climb since it opened at a lot of shops out here in the desert in that 4.5 range. You've also seen the total get bet up. When you look at what goes into this game, these two teams are going to get acquainted with each other as they're soon to be conference members in the Big 12. Only the second true road game for BYU this season. They did win at Utah State a few weeks ago on a Friday night. Every game BYU has played this season has been decided by 2 touchdowns or less. 4 of those contests have been decided by 10 points or less. Meanwhile, Baylor, this is a team that's actually found an ability both on the offensive and defensive side. The Bears ranked 17th in the country, 38 points per game, and ranked 21st in points allowed, 17.8. Credit to Dave Aranda, who shoved it up our ass last weekend with a bet on West Virginia at +3. When you look at BYU's offense, clearly this will be one of the best defenses they're going to face in the Baylor Bears. Does Jaren Hall and company have enough firepower to put a little bit of stress on what the Bears want to try and accomplish?
Why I think this side of the ball is so interesting is because you're going to have this cat and mouse element between BYU's offense and Dave Aranda's Baylor defense. The familiarity here is pretty wild because you have Baylor's new OC, Jeff Grimes. He spent 3 years at BYU as their OC. all of the terminology and signals, BYU decided to keep the same this year. So we heard Aaron Roderick, BYU's new offensive coordinator, say they had to replace everything, change all the signals and terminology this week. Everything was scrapped. And then you had BYU's head coach and his presser, Kalani Sitake, come out and say, Baylor knows our personnel and our scheme. 3 former BYU coaches are now with Baylor. We just have to execute. So that'll be something to look for here. Is the familiarity too much for BYU to overcome on offense? Now, BYU will be the best offense Baylor's faced metrically when you only include plays in which Jaren Hall was under center. If you look at the offenses Baylor's played to date, whether you're using efficiency or EPA per play numbers, average rank of the offenses faced are outside the top 75, and that only includes Baylor's FBS opponents. And Baylor right now, 52nd in defensive EPA per play. So it hasn't been this like lights out defense in year 2 for Dave Aranda. But what has to happen here is BYU's offensive line needs to show up. Somehow, an injured Boise D-line won that trench battle last week. And sure, there were, far too many miscues and mistakes and turnovers. But you can't lose a trench battle this week in a game with familiarity. This does come down to the Jimmies and Joes a little bit more in this kind of situation. Baylor's defensive line hasn't been great. 67th in line yards. They've only stuffed 12% of runs at or behind the line of scrimmage. They're 77th in EPA per rush allowed. So you would think or hope BYU is able to at least get some things going on the ground. BYU did get a little bit healthier along their O-line as well last week. Their center returned, James Empey. They're hoping their right tackle, Harris LaChance, will be back along with their fullback, Mason Wake. We'll see. Those two would be huge help in getting BYU's run game back to where it was a season ago, but keep an eye on those 2 injuries. Jaren Hall, obviously a mobile quarterback. You pair him with Tyler Algier, is massive. Those 2 right now have a 70% usage rate on the ground in games where Hall has played. I think that's a nice little dynamic here. Hall also has a game under his belt now to kind of work off the rust, and I think that's big before you hit the road for Baylor. When Jaren Hall's healthy, he has been pretty solid passing when he's kept clean. He's been good off play action. He's been fantastic when you blitz him. He just kind of needs to work on some of that down-to-down consistency as a passer. But I think this comes down to being able to establish the ground game. Can you get that going? Can BYU's offensive line play to a level that we thought they were coming into the season? They haven't been great there. This is really a tough game for me, Todd. Like, I have a hard time gauging Baylor. Clearly, they are well coached. They have some talent. The schedule the first 3 weeks of the season was horrific, so I didn't take much from what they did. And then Baylor went out and looked abysmal for 7 quarters against Iowa State and Oklahoma State, the best 2 teams they've played. So we were a little bit down on them. And then poof, like Baylor just shot out of a cannon last week against West Virginia. It didn't matter that we took 3 and the game closed as low as pick some places. They were a box-to-wire winner, right?
Dead nuts, wrong side.
Yes. And I will say this, though. If this game were played last week with Jaren Hall, and it was on a neutral, BYU would be -1. And so, obviously, you toss in home field advantage. There's changes to both teams' power ratings for drastically different results last week. I don't know about you, but my core number doesn't get me to 6.5, and I am being told that Baylor is the right side in this game, and that is not an early week dummy. And so, I just must be off on what Baylor truly is. That's just kind of all I can figure out here, because my number doesn't get me to where this is. And really, really strong move on Baylor. And again, a lot of people can look at a screen and be like, oh, I saw it move from 4.5 to 5 to 6.5. Right. Do you know the intent of the move? Is it trying to get 7? Like, my understanding is this is as real as a heart attack on Baylor. Now, we might see, if it gets to 7, a different viewpoint of a value hunter who only goes by numbers, and you could see this come back down to 6.5 if it did get to 7, maybe. But this is not a setup from everything I'm hearing.
Nope. I've heard similar sentiments, and I looked at this number and went, man, this number felt rich on the open, continued to move up, thought, that's definitely a dummy, and clearly don't feel that way now. So oftentimes, and I know this is going to sound ridiculous, and, math guys out there go, oh, you have to trust your numbers at all times. There's also an element of thin slicing that comes into a lot of what we do, and I don't think you or I would define ourselves as just blindly bet the numbers and play a ton of volume in the grand scheme of things. When all the intangibles, the numbers, the metrics, everything else don't line up on a game. The greatest thing that we have in our arsenal as bettors is to just pass on a game, and I think this contest falls into this particular bucket as things stand here on a Wednesday morning.
No doubt. And I think early on in the season, you're going with your numbers more than ever. Then all of a sudden, as you get to like the midpoint, you're factoring in a ton of schedule stuff. You're factoring in some situational things. You're factoring in matchups a little bit more. Early on in the season, I completely agree. Like, you can kind of, if you have a good number, just kind of blindly go with your number because you feel you're going to be ahead of odds makers drastically. Once you start to get into this portion of the season, again, a lot of it is matchup based. A lot of it is strength of schedule based. There are far more elements at play than just the number this time of year.
Ain't going to argue that for a second, nor will I argue with our loyal listeners who should want to follow all of us on social media. They can follow you at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. Of course, they can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Apple Podcasts, 5-star reviews. Go out there, say something nice about us for all the hard work we try and do. Hopefully we've made you smarter through the first 7 weeks of the college football season. Show your love, show your support, try and raise Bet the Board up to the heights we believe this podcast should be able to attain.
I forgot it, but we will announce a winner. Going back to that, completely forgot. Monday morning during the NFL recap podcast this coming week, we will announce the Apple Podcast winners. Again, as Todd alluded to, leave a 5-star review, a nice little comment. All of those get thrown into an automator. 3 random people will win $100 each for leaving the 5-star reviews. We'll announce those 3 winners on Monday's podcast. Sorry about that. We were supposed to do it today. I didn't look into that. We'll run it. We'll have it for Monday.
All good. Hey, sometimes things get in the way. Handicapping games takes a little bit more time than we expect. We're not defaulting on our responsibilities to you guys, our loyal listenership. So a couple more days to enter that particular contest. And the final game, Payne, that we have slated to break down here, arguably the most fun, excuse me, at least on paper. Highest total on the board by a lot in Knoxville, where Lane Kiffin gets a homecoming of sorts against the program that let him go as a kid years ago. Ole Miss, a field goal favorite on the road at Neyland. Total on this game been bet up to 82 at FanDuel Sportsbook. And when you look at these two teams, no surprise that this will feature a couple of the SEC's highest scoring offenses. Ole Miss comes in at 46.2 points per game. Tennessee, a shade more than 41. A definite step up for the Vols as far as their offensive firepower is concerned, given the doldrums that appeared there in East Tennessee over the last couple of seasons. When you look at Tennessee, so far this year, they've scored 30-plus points in 5 of 6 games. They have not beaten a ranked team in their own building, though, since 2018. They've also gained 400 yards. Jesus, easy for me to talk this morning. Gained 400-plus yards in 3 of 4 games. But when you look at Tennessee, yes, they scored 107 points and gained nearly 1,200 yards against Missouri and South Carolina. I'm not sure Ole Miss provides that much more of a step up in class, but Tennessee's margin for error, at least on the offensive side of the ball, is minimal, knowing that Matt Corral and company should be able to move the ball with ease against this Vols defensive front.
You're spot on, and I think Lane with a little revenge and Matt Corral, they're going to score basically on everyone, including the Vols. If Tennessee is going to pull off this upset here, I think it comes down to Hendon Hooker being able to keep pace and even exceed what Kiffin and Corral are doing. And it's going to be tough. And I do think there is a slight chance for that to happen. I've liked what I've seen from Hendon Hooker. And I know you and I both banged the table that he should have been the guy over Milton. Everyone knows our thoughts on Joe Milton as a quarterback. We told you it wasn't going to work last year at Michigan. Certainly wasn't going to work at Tennessee. Hendon Hooker was the far better option. It's good to see Josh Heupel realize that at this point in the season when there's still something to play for. Hendon Hooker's deficiencies over the years was accuracy. And he's going to see an Ole Miss defense that likes to rush 3 and drop 8 and make you read and throw into some tighter windows. Now, Ole Miss isn't very good doing that defensively, but that's their goal. And if Hendon Hooker can be accurate here, he's going to pick Ole Miss apart. And in his 2 starts, he has an 81% adjusted accuracy rate. The question for me becomes, is it a small sample that we should be cautious about believing in? Or is Hooker actually improved as a passer? And my gut says it's probably somewhere in the middle. You have to like what Josh Heupel's done offensively. I don't really think much of him as a recruiter, but I think he's got a really good grasp on offense and play calling and designing. And right now, Heupel's calling a game for Hooker that he's really comfortable with. Almost 59% of Hooker's throws have some play fake element to them, whether it's play action, whether it's RPO. The other reason Hendon Hooker has a really good chance to do extremely well in this game is the play fake pass game works ridiculously well when there's a ground game to complement it. And all signs are pointing to Tennessee being able to run the ball because we know Ole Miss plays with the light box. They're also light in the front 7, like weight-wise. They can't stop the run. 111th in defensive line yards, 111th in stuff rate, 124th in opportunity rate. You jumble all that stuff together in a pot, and you got an Ole Miss defense 116th in EPA per rush allowed. And
that's not very good.
No, it's not. And once kind of that like shock wore off with the rush 3 drop 8 nobody expected in the second half of game 1 against Louisville, Ole Miss has come crashing back down to life defensively. And that's Tennessee's strength offensively. Their O-line has been dominant, creating space for the ground game. Vols are 7th in line yards. Only 10% of runs have been stuffed. So the key for Tennessee to thrive offensively is pretty simple. Get the ground game going. Have Hendon Hooker throw accurately off the play fake game in these neutral down and distance situations. If Ole Miss is to have any semblance of success defensively, it'll be because their pass rush is able to get to Hooker in these 2nd and long, in 3rd and medium, and 3rd and long situations. That's really been the only area where Ole Miss has been good defensively. 8th in passing down sack rate. And the Vols offense, that's the one spot where they've been miserable. 129th in passing down sack rate allowed. So for as great as the Vols O-line has been moving bodies in the ground, they're not great in protection. So if you do see those situations where somehow Ole Miss is able to get Tennessee in the 3rd and medium, then the one thing they do well, which is get to the quarterback in that situation, then maybe we see that defense have a chance to get some stops. Otherwise, I think you're going to see a great performance from Hendon Hooker because he's got that support from his ground game.
When you look at Tennessee overall, and you talked about Hendon Hooker and the improvements he's made, and I know I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but you've watched Matt Corral at least enough. Do you believe his game translates to the next level? Do you think he can be a first-round draft pick in the modern-day NFL and have an instant impact?
I think so, yeah. I mean, he's got a cannon for an arm. He's accurate. The decision-making process needs to probably get a little bit better. He makes some mistakes, but I think he's a guy that's focused now, and obviously like millions and millions and millions of dollars will certainly focus you. But I think ultimately when you look at some of the quarterback options, I'd rather have
terrible.
Matt Corral. Yeah, it's not great. I'd rather have Matt Corral than the kid from UNC. And it'll be interesting because I always kind of think about certain things more relative to the teams I like. I think this obviously puts a little bit more added pressure on, maybe a team like the Dolphins, right? Because there isn't that elite quarterback in this draft class. I know a lot of people are hyping up the Nevada kid, but we're going to find out in the next week or two if Tua is their guy or if they go and make the trade for Deshaun Watson. If they go and make the trade for Deshaun Watson, it's pretty telling that they don't love a quarterback in this draft. And I don't think there's a clear-cut guy, at least to this point. But I think if I had to draft Matt Corral in the first round, I'd have no issues doing so.
That's fair. I mean, it's a question that I watch his game, and I love him adding the element of using his legs. It's provided a wrinkle for Ole Miss's offense, and I think you see quarterbacks now coming to the next level. That typically translates if you can extend plays, if you can at least provide a viable threat. Just don't know about his arm strength and some of those other things.
Ooh.
When you look at this Ole Miss team, too...
He makes throws that NFL guys can't make right now. I think it's more upstairs for him.
Well, that's always, I guess it's always going to be a limited factor. If you don't have it between the ears, I guess that's the hardest part to get to translate, sometimes even more so than the physical attributes.
Yes, and I'm not sure I'd want him in Miami. Just that that nightlife might not be for him, but I think part of that aspect of his game has changed a little bit. I think we're making a lot of progress over the last 12 to 18 months with him as a person and his dedication to football.
Couple of injuries to keep in mind as well for Ole Miss as you handicap this game. Left guard Caleb Warren suffered an ankle injury that's going to require surgery. Ole Miss has been down a couple of weapons as well. Jonathan Mingo dealing with a broken foot. Jarian Ely, at the time of recording, we weren't quite sure if he's going to clear concussion protocol. We know Snoop Connor and Henry Parrish have carried the load as well. And as we talked about, Matt Corral provides a viable threat running the ball. I do want to get your take real quick before we wrap up some of the games in regards to this total, since I know it'll be widely talked about, Payne. When we look at college football at 2021, low 70s, pretty common, mid 70s, high 70s even, but an 82 where this number currently sits, going to be one of the larger ones that we'll see this year. Can you find ways from a modeling standpoint and everything else to make cases to go over numbers this high, knowing all it takes sometimes can be a 5-minute drive that really stymies any chance you have to go over, kind of as we saw Ole Miss against Alabama in a game that landed 42-21?
Well, that ultimately becomes the big question. And I don't like this one as much as I liked the Alabama one. And because I knew Alabama was just going to stick with the ground game. And Tennessee is going to be able to do that, but they don't necessarily have the defense to get the crucial stops against Ole Miss on the other end. And so for me, we've seen this total move up from 78 now to 83. I thought 78 was a touch short, but I'm not running to the window to go over 83 at this point either. But you're right. When you have these defenses, I guess specifically an Ole Miss, and you're playing the, rush 3, drop 8, and the goal is to prevent the explosive, and the other team's able to pick up 4, 5, 6 yards on the ground and the clock is churning, that sometimes becomes the recipe. If you can get the 4-minute, 5-minute turnover, you can get the 4 or 5, 6-minute field goal. That really impacts things drastically. Now, we had 2 defenses last week that played those similar styles, and there was a ton of familiarity. And Arkansas and Ole Miss, and I told you my core number screamed over, but the matchup I didn't love. Probably should have went with my core number there.
Well, a game that started 7-0 after the first quarter, I guess when you have
I'm thinking great. I'm like, fuck the numbers. I'm a big brain guy over here. This is great. This is exactly what I thought the problem could be for this game to go over. And
it's amazing how 50-yard plays can erase any progress when Ole Miss has 4 of them in that game against Arkansas, including one of the more entertaining fourth quarters that you're going to watch. Obviously not if you're an Arkansas fan or for anybody that may have had an under ticket, but definitely should be a great game at Neyland Stadium under the lights Saturday evening, 7:30 Eastern time between Ole Miss and the Tennessee Volunteers. Again,
let me ask you something here, by the way.
Sure, fire away.
Lane Kiffin. Is he on your workout regimen? He's lost a ton of weight. He got a little plump down here when he was at FAU.
So what I was told from someone that in and around that area, Lane Kiffin apparently had a crisis, so to speak, in terms of that he couldn't tell players to commit to a healthier lifestyle approach both on and off the field and come in if he wasn't going to be that embodiment and reflect some of those values. So Lane decided he would clean up his diet. He would work on his workout regimen. I can't claim one way or another if he's decided to abandon some of the adult beverages, but at the same time, he doesn't look nearly as puffy or akin to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man like we saw for stretches at the latter portion of his time at FAU, or if you look at the videotape of when he landed in Oxford once he accepted the Ole Miss job.
Lane was living his best life down here. Let me just tell you that. He was rolling into the office in basketball shorts and T-shirts. He was partying it up. His office was located next to a Shake Shack, a P.F. Chang's, and a J. Alexander's, and I know he was eating quite well. And there was also this area where, right from the campus, there is a Barnes & Noble. And let me tell you, that is better than any nightclub you could envision to pick up women. So if you were someone in the South Florida area, and you're younger, head to Barnes & Noble right over across from FAU. And
things you did not expect to hear. Things you did not expect to hear on this podcast. Payne encouraging all of our loyal listeners to go to a bookstore. Payne, what was the last book you read? What was the last book you read?
Well, I think that's the irony, because everyone, when I retire, wants me to write a book, and I'm like, I don't even know if I would read that book. So
that's why you hire editors and ghostwriters. You don't actually have to read your own writing.
Yes, there we go. I think the last book that I have enjoyed reading from front to back is The
If you tell me go ahead.
The Client. That was the book. The one that was a movie remake with Susan Sarandon.
Well, little John Grisham action. I thought you were going to tell me the last book you read start to finish was either Curious George or The Cat in the Hat, and then I was going to be slightly even more concerned about the 8 days you spent on campus in Tallahassee.
No.
So,
not the case.
All right. All kidding aside, a couple of games that should be fun to watch. None, at least on the surface, that should have major impact on the national championship chase, but one never knows. If Kentucky can pull off an upset against Georgia, Mississippi State can catch lightning in a bottle against Alabama, or we'll see some of these conference races shake down. FanDuel.com/bet the board. If you're not already playing there, this is the perfect time to start. Take advantage of their sign-up bonus, $1,000 risk-free bets, all sorts of enhanced odds, whether it's Arizona that came online weeks ago, Connecticut getting started in earnest, and a variety of other states. No excuse not to have some money in FanDuel to be able to take advantage this fine football season. Payne, last weekend, you and I found ourselves landing on a best bet that was over before she ever lived. In the form of the West Virginia Mountaineers, I take responsibility for Neil Brown not getting his team buttoned up and ready to go in that particular game. As far as investable opportunities for college football week 7, do you have somewhere that you'd like to steer our listeners this weekend?
Team effort, sir. Team effort.
Win as a team, lose as a team.
Let's go to the Big Ten. Rotation number 132. Michigan State, Indiana, first half under 24. There's some really juiced 24.5 out there. Let's just call this, for the sake of everyone, 24 or better. I think we're going to get a little bit better of an effort defensively from Indiana here. Off the bye week, you have a little bit more of a controlled offense. Offensively, all signs point to Tuttle being under center, and when you look at his ADOT numbers, substantially shorter than what Penix has delivered. And all signs point to a little bit more of a controlled game based on what Tom Allen's saying. You also have some crucial weapons that are out for Indiana, more of the explosive variety. We know DJ Matthews is down, and then earlier this week, Ellis, kind of the Hoosiers gadget guy, is also out. So there are some weapons missing. I think this just plays more towards an under, a more controlled game. I was going to give out the under full game at 51.5, but that got smoked yesterday, and we haven't seen much movement on the first half, so let's go in that direction. Michigan State, Indiana, first half under, 24 or better.
You know what's so interesting when you look at this Michigan State team, we know Kenneth Walker has gained all sorts of momentum in terms of his quest for a Heisman Trophy, and I would have said anyone considering a running back is absolutely nuts. But the Wake Forest transfer has really given this Michigan State offense a dynamic they desperately lacked. One thing last weekend in that game against Rutgers, I mean, living essentially on the big play, 4 touchdowns of 60-plus yards there. I think Indiana, to your point, gets healthier in the secondary. The defensive line will be much more engaged, and I think Tom Allen realizes without Michael Penix there to make some plays, no DJ Matthews in the receiving core, it's methodical, it's moving, dinking and dunking the ball down the field, trying to get the ground game going, and let's hope we get a first half much like the game against Cincinnati before things got potentially squirrely in that second half.
Yes, love it. Let's do it.
Alrighty, for Payne Insider, follow him on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board. Don't worry. Oh my God, this is what happens when you sleep a couple of hours instead of getting your normal allotment.
You were out partying last night.
I was not partying. I was not partying
on a school night.
The guy did not have one alcoholic beverage. The late puck drop of 7:20 threw me for a wrench, and I may or may not have had one game I still had to break down to get prepared for this podcast once I get home. So I'm quickly realizing, Payne, as I inch ever so close to 40 years old, my ability to function on 3.5, 4 hours of sleep, not exactly the same as when I used to leave the nightclub at 3 a.m. and be able to lead meetings in a corporate setting at 7:30. I need my 6. If I don't have my 6, the fog sets in. So on that note, a 24-hour rest before we're right back with you tomorrow to talk about the National Football League. But come Saturday with a Michigan State first half under ticket in hand, we'll see you at the window.